Welcome back to the Product Marketing Festival. I hope you're enjoying the content so far. I want to thank you all for joining us and send out an extra special thank you to all our sponsors, partners, speakers and participants who together have made this event possible. Their sessions are bursting with insights to help you level up. But remember, the learning doesn't stop here. If you aren't already, you can become a PMA member and benefit from unlimited access to all this week's content, along with a whole host of other exclusive content and tools. What's more, why not check out Product Marketing Core, our industry-renowned certification? Join hundreds of your PMM peers and get certified today. And remember, have your questions at the ready. Simply post them in the comments section and get awesome advice from our experts. We've got plenty more magic up our sleeves that's guaranteed to blow you away. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the talks.
Folks, I am absolutely excited and thrilled to be here with you all at the Product Marketing Festival as one of the only pricing speakers in the lineup. So exciting. So I wanted to thank the organizing team first for having me, and obviously all of you audience members for joining in and being with me for the next 20-25 minutes as I walk through some learnings, insights, experiences from being in the area of pricing for the last 5 years or so. I don't claim to be an expert. I learned from a lot of people, including some of the best in the industry. So I'll try and distill down some of that insights into themes that will hopefully help you be a little more educated about pricing if you aren't already in understanding this space. So I have a ton of content to cover. So without further ado, let's dig in. All right, very quickly, a little bit about myself. So I've been, as I said, being in the pricing space and working on go-to-market projects for enterprise software vendors for the last 5 years or so. Prior to that, I do have some sales experience. So that gives me a little bit of seller empathy as I approach this topic. One of the reasons I love pricing, it gives me a 360-degree view of the business. I would argue there is no other function, probably product marketing comes pretty close in terms of being at the heart, the center of the company, and having a ripple effect throughout the company on whatever you do. And so, I love being in that area and being that impactful from a pricing perspective. At a personal level, I do enjoy playing music, but a lot of my time these days is spent being a first-time dad, where I'm learning every week on being a better person, as well as take care of the child and helping my wife out. All right, who is this talk for? Well, the talk is for PMMs who either fall in one of those 3 buckets. So one, you don't really work on pricing, but do want to learn more. You want to keep yourself abreast and updated. Second, you do get involved in pricing from time to time for various reasons. Maybe you own a particular product or service and its product marketing activities, and as part of that decision-making play a role. Or you have started to take ownership of pricing as part of your group. And I have been extremely fortunate to start my pricing career in a product marketing organization, which was an extremely enriching experience. And I believe it's the right place to start. And so what do I want to cover as part of the next 20 minutes or so is basically distilling down to 5 key themes and drilling a little deeper into each one of them. Let's dive in. All right, let's kick it off by what those themes are. Number 1, knowing the lay of the land. This is extremely crucial from a pricing perspective. Pricing strikes to the heart of the company. And so there's a lot of stakeholders who have skin in the game. And so knowing how to navigate the complexities and vagaries of your organization and its decision-making around pricing will help you be more successful as you make changes. Number 2, understanding that price is not about just price. Price is what you pay, value is what you get. It's the entire equation. Understanding both sides of the coin will help you paint the big picture and then craft appropriate strategies to be successful. Number 3, software pricing is not just pricing. It's pricing, it's packaging, it's licensing, it's contractual terms, it's terms and conditions, and all of them put together. So understanding the different levers that you have to pull and then being able to coherently pull them together is what will make you successful. So that's theme number 3. Theme number 4, this is something that product marketers will be extremely sensitive to, and that is very important to them, being able to communicate value messaging, positioning. And so how do you communicate your way to success from a pricing perspective? We'll dig into that in theme 4. And then the last theme is, how do you bring a product mentality to pricing? that thought process where you're being iterative and trying to move the needle, and it's never 100% done. So we'll get into that a little bit. All right, let's begin. Theme number one, knowing the lay of the land. Probably my favorite theme of all the 5 themes, and the most critical before you even get started. Now, decision making in organizations from a pricing perspective can go in many different directions. And I've seen various decisions being made in various different ways, where afterward you're sort of scratching your head and saying, how did we even get here? And this particular sort of cartoon stuck at the heart of it, where you're making a decision and someone's questioning, well, was alcohol involved in making that decision? And so, let's figure out what questions to ask to understand what the lay of the land is, right? And one thing I will mention before kicking in here is the reason this is important is that a lot depends on your organizational context, because there is no one size fits all approach from a pricing perspective. Do you have a product-led motion or a sales-led motion? Is your product technically complex, or is it sort of simple, easy, install and use? In terms of, are you a startup? Are you a large established company? Have you had a pricing person, or have you not? Have you been around for 5 years? Have you been around for 30 years? Is your product portfolio simple or complex with multiple products? A lot of these factors go in to figuring out what the right approaches should be. So your step number 0 should be to understand the nature of the beast inside the company. And how do you do that? By asking some key questions. Question number 1, who is involved in the decision-making process? When are decisions made? Is it a seasonal activity? Is it something ongoing? This is the most important. How are decisions being made? Is there a set of rules that governing how you will approach pricing decisions? Or is it sort of some tribal knowledge that everyone's using? And lastly, how is success measured? So let's get some specific questions out here, right? So from a who perspective, is it a decision managed by a committee? Does it have a dedicated owner or some part-time owners? Who has skin in the game? Obviously, product, sales, finance are key, but who else is involved from a leadership perspective? Very important, when are decisions made? Is it just in time, right before a product launch, or is it a proactive approach, right? When you're sort of in the product conceptualization stage? Is it look like as if it's a seasonal activity where you have to evaluate something every year, or is it sort of more ongoing or more frequent? Is it iterative, or is it once and done, where you put something out there and you sort of move on to the next thing? The most important amongst all these questions, how? Are there some shared principles that have been involved, or some tribal knowledge that is being used to guide decisions? Or maybe there isn't. Is there some prioritization list that you're going through? And probably the most important point of all, what biases and emotions are governing those decisions? I've seen this countlessly across companies, where maybe there's a recency bias, where you hired a new executive and he said, well, this is how Microsoft does it, we should do it this way. Or is there something stemming from the founder of the company himself? He or she has a view about pricing, and that's sort of stemming through. Is there a core product bias? Sometimes you have a core product that's extremely successful, and so it has a pricing approach, and you assume that's worked as well. And so you assume everything else you launch also has to mirror that approach to be successful. Or has your organization have had sort of never again moments? Maybe you made a change, it was an error, and then you sort of went back and sort of decided never again will we do that, and sort of now have this fear in your mind, right? And lastly, how is success measured? Is it about the total revenue? Is it about how price is being realized? Is the focus on acquisition? Is the focus on retention? Is the goal to sort of understand customer perceptions and manage around that? Or what about the feedback that your sales team bring, and how is that valued inside the company? All of these questions and asking these questions will help you understand what the lay of the land is. And before you make your move in terms of recommending a change or making a business case, this will help you navigate. All right. Some data to support this. This is from a product pragmatic marketing survey from maybe a couple of years ago. A couple of pointers here. You can see then in terms of when was the price first put on the product, not until right before the release, 45%. That is a staggeringly high number. And then in terms of how did the final price compare to the price in the business plan, 33% price stayed the same, which tells me what was the iteration done in subsequent time when the product was put out in the market. So this gives you a little bit of lay of the land, and you may not be alone. But again, organizations can be extremely mature as well, where you can start thinking about pricing even before designing the solution, or even before development has started. Okay, so now once you understand the lay of the land, now you have to understand the nature of the beast from a pricing perspective. So one of the important themes here, and this is, I believe, a quote from Warren Buffett: price is what you pay, value is what you get. There are two sides to the coin. You need to understand both sides to be successful. And so let me put out a framework here that will help sort of put some concreteness around this, right? So first piece of this is value management. There's potential value that is to be created for the customer. There's actual value that's created by your service. And there's obviously a value creation gap there. And the most important step, there's some actual value and there's some perceived value from a specific customer segment. And that gap is typically bridged from a value communication perspective. And if you don't communicate well, there's a gap between actual and perceived value. And to understand how to capture all this value comes the pricing pieces. How do you create a pricing structure that will be able to capture this value scalably and profitably? What about pricing policies in terms of dealing with individual customers and how to influence their willingness to pay? What about setting price levels? Are you going to set price levels that are very aggressive sort of tone where you can capture a broader share of the market, or are you going to take a more premium approach? And what about reacting to competition? What if a competitor shows up and is starting to do a land grab with some extremely low prices? How do you react to that? And so value and price, you need to understand both in order to be a more proactive and sustainable strategy, right? And so you got to measure value, you got to measure pricing, and rinse and repeat as you try and move along the life cycle of a company. Let's spend maybe a minute about understanding what this term value really means, and specifically what the role that you have to play in terms of translating the value proposition of your product or service into a dollar economic value per customer segment, and trying to manage and maintain that over time to guide some of your pricing decisions. So in terms of defining, there's economic value, so that's a dollar value. There's psychological value, believe it or not, in B2B as well, where you think about, how does your product reduce anxiety? You also think about value just not from what the service does, but all touch points across the organization. So how is your customer experience from a, let's say, a customer success point of view? You also think about value in use from a software perspective. What jobs are done using your software? In terms of measuring economic value, there's a few different ways. You from a software perspective, you end up impacting either the cost, revenue, compliance, or risk management from a customer perspective. And so you can go in those dimensions and try to quantify value. Value, again, is specific to a customer cohort or profile. It depends on which customer you're talking about. And value is always about differential value. You evaluate versus the next best alternate. It's never about, hey, I created $100,000 of value for the customer. It's about, hey, the customer had an alternate, and what about that? So you have to count the differential value. So let's take a very quick and dirty example, and you can all build sort of value models for your product and service in more depth, right? So assume you have a data cleansing service that saves 50 to 200 hours of data scientist time every year. And so let's say a data scientist costs $300 an hour. You translate that to the hours, multiply that by the hours saved, and you're looking at, roughly 15 to 60K $1,000 of savings per year. Now, obviously, this doesn't take into account alternates. There might be customer alternates that might reduce that number. And then let's say the cherry on top is reduce anxiety. Your data scientists are happy building predictive models than trying to clean data, right? So this is a quick and dirty example of how you can look at a range of value and then validate that across your customer base by taking some sample qualitative interviews and then understanding what that value looks like. Remember, it's easier to have a value conversation with your customer when you're interviewing them than having a pricing conversation or trying to understand what price they will pay. So first, sort of throwing light on the value piece is going to serve you well as you start to get into the pricing piece. All right, theme number 3. We've spoken about value. What about the other side of the equation? Now, software pricing is not just pricing, as I mentioned. It's multiple pieces. And I'll use this DocuSign pricing page as an example, right? So you look at different elements on this page. You look at licensing. You're counting per user. Are you counting activity? Are you counting spend? Obviously, in this particular example, you're counting users as your licensing metric. That is key. Remember, in intellectual property pricing or software pricing, you can count anything. And so choosing that value metric is key when it comes to pricing and packaging. Element number 2, packages. You see here 3 packages that are on the screen, and then the 4th package for you have to call the vendor. These are functional packages, and there's a reason they're there. They're either here to address different segments. They're either here to maybe map to a value path. Maybe you start as a standard user and upgrade to a business pro at the appropriate time as you grow in deriving value from this product. And so these packages are certain sort of serving specific purposes here. And so your job is to work with the product manager, understand the roadmap, and understand which features and functions are fitting into each of these packages, and how do you evolve that over time to sort of sustainably capture value. And obviously the final piece, pricing. What are the dollar numbers on each of them? $10, 25, 40. What price points do you put? How do you evaluate them? How do these price points change based on, let's say, how many users are you buying? What about annual versus monthly billing? What about committing for 1 year or 3 year? And so you get to set all of these numbers to influence and capture value from a pricing perspective. And then last but not the least, there's the contract level in terms of, hey, are you offering a price lock? What about renewal price guarantees? There's so many terms and conditions that you have to take into account, especially when you're dealing with a large B2B buyer. And so the key takeaway here is that there's multiple connected levers to pull. Licensing, packaging, pricing brought together is your offer. And so when you create a good offer, when you have evaluated each of these levers correctly and put together a good offer, it'll help you be more successful. I'll share a litmus test to evaluate sort of the strength or weaknesses of your particular pricing model. And so this will help you understand the trade-offs involved in making a decision to create a model. So let's play out all them, right? So there's a number of criteria. Let me stress upon a few of them. Number one, does it create what's called a taximeter effect? Remember those days when cell phones used to be charged or cell service used to be charged per minute? I was always looking at how many minutes I've used and created this effect where I wanted to cut the call early. So does your metric do that? Does your model do that? Does it stifle increased use? It's one of the important considerations when creating a model. Number two, is it sort of from an experience perspective, visible, trackable, manageable? What if the customer doesn't even know how to estimate requirements, or you haven't given them tools to estimate requirements? That leads to a terrible experience and customers are unhappy. What about scaling? Does your model work for a customer with 10 users? And does it scale up to, let's say, a customer with 10,000 users or 100,000 users or even 1 million users? Does your model scale across the board there from a capability perspective, packaging, pricing, licensing, all metrics? So whenever you're evaluating a model, keep some of these criteria in mind as you evaluate, and it will help you understand the trade-offs involved. Now, great organizations are able to succeed on a lot of these criteria and be more successful in the marketplace. And so your job is to evaluate those trade-offs and understand what works for you. Let's look at a couple of very, very quick examples. Two examples here, or rather one example with two options. This is a printing service, HP. They used to sell on a per cartridge basis. You go to the shop, pick up a black and white or a color cartridge. There's a fixed quantity of ink in that particular box. And now the subscription service is pages per month. So the question to think about it is basically, what is more connected to value? Are you, from a consumer perspective, do you think about value in terms of number of pages that you print? And you think that's more fair? Or do you think it was more sort of simple to buy cartridges? Well, I would argue that it's pages per month is so better connected from a value perspective. I don't have to worry about black or white. If I make some errors or maybe there's some garbage printing, HP can sort of give me back pages back in my account. So there's so much more flexibility and better customer experience. Similar example, think about an example like a digital contract system, like a DocuSign or an Adobe. Should they charge per user, or should they charge per every document, envelope, or contract that they sign? Again, this will depend on a segmentation perspective. If you're a real estate segment, maybe every contract is important and you're happy with this model. Or maybe in another area, in another segment where the per user model might make sense. So it might vary per segment. So you have to break down all of these different options and make the right choice for you. Okay, take a quick pause here. We've looked at sort of knowing the lay of the land. We've talked about value. We've talked about price structures from a software perspective. And here's where this is probably the most important from a PMM perspective, where you can have an immediate and direct influence and impact from a pricing perspective. Now, you have to communicate your way to success. And what I mean by that is, when you're thinking about pricing as your product, you're also thinking about how to communicate the value of the model itself. What are its strengths? What are the weaknesses? So one of the themes that I'll talk about here is to help reduce the risk discount. And what I mean by that is, when buyers are buying your software, if they will perceive risk, if they don't understand the model, if they don't understand the product, they will perceive risk. And then therefore they may say, well, I'm not going to really value this at the number that you're telling me to. From a seller perspective, if your sales team doesn't understand the pricing model, they won't sell. Maybe they'll sell other products of the model that they do understand. And so there is this risk discount idea where the seller is forced to reduce price because your buyer is perceiving risk, right? And how do you mitigate this? Communication, communication, communication. It's internal communication and enabling sales. And these could be done in methods of explaining how the model works. Tools to size accounts. Can sellers help customers estimate requirements so that the level of risk is reduced? Do you have messaging to defend the model? What if your buyer comes back and says, hey, this other competitor is offering me this model and it doesn't constrain me in XYZ ways? Well, you need to arm your salespeople to have those insights of the benefits of your model. What are the things that it is sort of better at versus competitor models? And then there's customer facing. Do you have blogs or white papers that explain the benefits of your model and how does that link with the product? Does your pricing model link with the value message and the branding of your entire product or service? And then are you able to explain the philosophy behind the model and also share some customer success stories of how the model worked for specific customers? So let's walk through a few examples and see how companies have done this successfully. Here's an example of App Dynamics. It's one of the APM application performance management tools. So when they rolled out a different pricing model, they put out a blog talking about digital transformation and how this pricing model will help them make the buying process much easier. They also linked in their title the final objective, taming the challenge of digital transformation. And so they're communicating that this new model will help you achieve that goal along with the product itself. Another excellent example, this was Splunk rolling out new pricing. And so they rebranded their platform as data to everything. And so you look at how they didn't just make the change on the product and the branding side, but they also connected it to pricing and rolled out some new pricing approaches that'll help consume their service much better. And so they branded it as data to everything pricing. So it connected the platform brand to the pricing model itself. And they put the message out there that this is flexible offerings, make it easy to bring data to every question. And so this is sort of the integrated messaging that you're looking at, and also communicating the offerings and the pricing model benefits. Another sort of startup solution here, they talk about stopping to pay by per user or per seat, which doesn't work for many different services, and switching to sort of unlimited sends and users. And they didn't want to limit that. And so how did they communicate? They put out a post and they said, we'll call out key brands to illustrate the philosophy of a platform-based pricing model. So they call these brands out: HubSpot, Pardot, Marketo, Eloqua. Why are they not doing this? And here's why we align with this, and drawing that analogy from shifting to a manual to a digital world. Last couple of examples, Power BI, they link their pricing model to the new economic disruption that enables data culture everywhere. So they're tying the pricing model to the product narrative about democratizing essentially the business intelligence capabilities across the organization. And they're talking about pricing being as disruptive as the product. And TurboTax, look at this, helping choose the right offer for the customers. They have this selection tool, you pick the kind of things that you did in a year, and then they'll offer you the right packaging. There's also, by the way, the best packaging model that I've ever seen. It grows with you as sort of you advance in life. So it's very nicely done. You should study it. All right. Last but not the least, before we wrap up, and I know we've gone through a lot of content, and I'll hopefully this slide deck will be shared, and happy to take questions offline as well, is bringing a product mentality to pricing. What this really means is sort of just a mental framing that helps you broaden the approach. Never 100% done, grows with the company. Remember, your product portfolio is growing, so why shouldn't pricing? It does involve fierce prioritization. There are so many things you can do with your model, but what about the business goals, and what should be prioritized, and what should the pricing model be optimized to? It does require deep empathy, connecting with your stakeholders, connecting with your customers, understanding their buyer journey, and then working backwards in creative ways to figure out your model. And then there's many points of execution failure. If your sales team doesn't get it, as we spoke about, it'll break apart, and then you'll be in trouble. And so having this mentality really helps. I'll talk about also what you do from a product mentality perspective that you also apply to pricing is you measure outcomes, just like how you would do for a product. Work on price realization analysis. Think about what prices are being realized at different units of volume, and understand if there's prices are all over the place, and then work backwards to see what changes can you make in your pricing and packaging model. So in this particular example, for example, you have a lot of price points or a lot of variability rather when customers or sellers are selling the same amount of list price units. And so if that's the case, this may point you to the direction of, hey, are there different needs and willingness to pay? Is there a one size fits all package that we've put out there? And do we need to create some additions to account for this variability from a pricing perspective? Last but not the least, you do need to connect your pricing to business goals. And so think about measuring success from a model perspective to tying back to these business goals. You could have acquisition centric goals and creating the right pricing strategies. You think about a free or a freemium or a trial design, and does that align with your customer acquisition targets? What about conversions? You can think about, are we giving away too much or too little in your free model? You can also think about if that's impacting the perception of your paid plans, and if there's a particular segment that you're missing out altogether. Acquisition centric goals, acquisition centric pricing design. Similarly, you could also talk about retention, and also you could think about monetization as you help customers grow through the packaging journey. All right, that was a lot of content, and I would readily admit that we went through a lot. So just to recap, start with knowing the lay of the land, how are decisions made in your organization, understanding value and understanding how that's connected to price. So building a shared understanding of value and estimating it inside the organization for your product and service. Pricing, understanding software pricing, what are the different levers that you have to pull and how do you bring them together? Communicating your ways to success. Arm the sales team and arm your customers with a better understanding of how your model works and what's the philosophy behind it. And last, have a product mentality, which is iterative and never 100% done, to make improvements from time to time. With that, I'd like to thank you for spending time with me in this whirlwind journey. I'm happy to take questions, obviously, at this point. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. There's a number of folks in the pricing community who are happy to talk about this topic and share some experiences at a personal level. Thank you all. Appreciate your time today.